As you guys know, this is a weekly program that we have from 11:45 to 12:35, 12:45 every Friday. The speakers vary and so do the topics. Today's speaker is Dr. Deborah Huntley. She's now our provost of academic affairs and everything else, student affairs, and a whole host of other departments. But she started in 1998, correct? As a professor here. So she has kind of moved her way up, and she can tell you a little bit more about her journey if you're interested. But she's been a dean, she's been assistant dean, so on and so forth. And it's kind of made the leadership journey here at SVSU. So today her presentation is the case for being wrong, or there's nothing wrong with being wrong. So we're going to turn it over to her today. She's going to ask you some questions. So the videotape, she's the only one that has a mic on, so don't worry about it. She'll kind of summarize what you say, so it'll be on tape.
I'll try.
Yeah. Sound good?
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Huntley.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you all for coming. I wasn't sure how many people would be around on such a beautiful Friday afternoon, so I'm glad you're here. When I was asked to do this, I thought I should talk to you about something that I'm really an expert at, and being wrong is certainly one of those things. As Katrina said, the original title of this was The Case for Being Wrong. But I thought about that, and I thought, I'm not really trying to tell you that being wrong is something you should strive for. I'm just trying to convince you that there's actually nothing wrong with being wrong. Of course, I could be wrong about that, but I don't think so. So I have a question for you. How many of you like being wrong? Anybody? You do?
I learn from my mistakes when I'm wrong.
Okay, she learns from... Yeah, learning from mistakes when you're wrong is a really good thing, and that'll be one of the themes that I try to bring up. But most people consider making mistakes to be a negative thing, right? Messing things up is not pleasant to us. We really like being right, don't we? I mean, how many marriages have been ruined, or relationships have been ruined by people saying, I told you so, because they feel so good about being right. It's something that we all like. It's almost as good as chocolate or something like that. People would rather be right about something that's negative than be wrong about it. And I'll give you a personal example. Back in 2006, I bought a hybrid car. I bought a Prius, a Toyota Prius. And, I felt pretty good about myself as gas prices started to rise. And in fact, I felt a little bit of satisfaction as they continued to rise because, gee, aren't I clever? I bought a hybrid. Now, it's kind of perverse when you think about it that somebody should be happy about gas prices rising, right? I mean, really? And when they started to fall again a few years later, I felt a little bit annoyed by that because I didn't feel so right about my choice of buying this car. So there's an odd satisfaction to being right, even when you're right about something negative. This is part of the reason why global warming is such a political thing, right? People that think that global warming is caused by humans are really dismayed by a beautiful warm winter. While people that are convinced that global warming is simply, in other people's imaginations, are delighted when we have a winter like last winter where we're so cold we can't stand it. So we'd rather be right about our beliefs than actually have a pleasant outcome. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. We're really, as human beings, tied to the idea of being right, and that being wrong is something that we should avoid. Although we also recognize it as a fundamental part of human nature. I mean, what's that old expression? To err is human, right? Of course, we all recognize that we do it. So, I am a scientist. I'm a chemist. I was a chemistry professor for a while. And scientists are kind of uniquely trained to try to be wrong. You try to prove yourself wrong. And so scientists actually have to develop a taste for it and an openness to the fact that their ideas could be wrong. And I think I've learned a lot by doing that, by learning how to say, okay, well, here's what I think is happening. But if I'm wrong, this is what I would expect. And then trying to see if in fact I am wrong or if I am right. And I think that idea of looking at your wrongness, looking where you might be wrong, is really valuable in a lot of different ways, in sort of navigating your daily lives, and certainly in learning, which is what you're all here for. So my goal today is to convince you that there is a lot of value in being wrong and not being afraid to be wrong. It is, in fact, as you said, the catalyst to success. It is what's going to make you successful. If you're not wrong, sometimes, even frequently, you're probably not pushing yourself very hard. And that's okay, I guess. There's some satisfaction in that. You feel good. But it's kind of like being a saltine cracker. It's okay, but it's not interesting. It's not going to move you anyway. Wouldn't you rather be bruschetta or maybe at least a Triscuit? So I want to be upfront about this. These are not, whoops, there we are. Some of the things I'm going to talk about today were inspired by two really interesting books that I read. One is called Being Wrong. The other is called Thinking Fast and Slow. And you'll hear a little bit from each of these. By no means am I going to summarize these two books. They're two of my favorites, shown in that picture with my favorite coffee mug as well, by the way. But they're really interesting. Now, I know you guys have a lot of reading to do for your classes, but if you're looking for something that's interesting, these are both really interesting. They've given me insights into why it's so hard to change people's minds and hearts about things, even in the presence of strong evidence. It's taught me how to recognize my own preconceived biases and kind of try and work through them. And if you don't have enough to do, I recommend them. And if anybody actually does read them, give me a call. We'll get pizza and talk about it, because there's some really, really interesting things. Being Wrong by Catherine Schultz and Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Okay, now, question. Do you know right from wrong? What does it feel like to be wrong? What does it feel like to be wrong?
Embarrassing.
It's embarrassing. But when you're embarrassed, what has just happened? When you realize what is embarrassing to you? You've realized something, haven't you? You've realized that you made a mistake. So at the moment you realize that, you're not wrong anymore, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the transition from being wrong to being right that's embarrassing. It's more of, I was embarrassed because I was wrong, but now I see. Because if you're still wrong, you don't know it yet, right? So you don't know what it's like to be wrong, because it feels exactly like being right. It's a set of assumptions that you hold that feel right to you, because you don't know they're wrong until you aren't wrong anymore. So there's this kind of funny thing about that. The reason that we think we're right most of the time is because we are right most of the time. Think about it. Every single day you go through your life making a million different judgments and decisions, most of which you're not even aware of. But they get you here. You're all in this room today. You did a whole lot of things that got you to this room. Whether it's right or not, you'll decide after this talk. But the fact is, you tried to get to this room, and you did. So you navigated the campus. Maybe you had to drive. You didn't hit anything, I hope. You managed to make a lot of decisions in your day about what it would take you to get here. And you were right, because here you are, right? So we do things almost exclusively right. And so we have this fundamental sense of ourselves that we are competent and we are correct. You can do millions of things. When you're driving down the road, you get very, very subtle clues from other drivers about what they're going to do, and you can respond to them, right? You can sort of tell if somebody's about to cut you off, or if somebody is going to pull out of that driveway. How do you know that? You're not talking to them. You can barely see their face. But there's subtle clues that you are processing correctly that are keeping you alive, survival skills. And so you're used to being right, and so the notion that some of those perceptions could be wrong is probably uncomfortable to you. The perception or the idea that you have entire value systems that might be wrong I shouldn't say value system is wrong, but you have a set of ideas that could be based on faulty information. That doesn't seem right to you, because it feels like you're right, because mostly you are. Okay, we have these things in our heads, these amazing brains. They process, like I said, a ton of stuff, and I really hope this works, because I didn't have a chance to try out the technology, but here we are. Please get there. Oh, good. Okay. All right. I'd like to make this full screen if I can. Good. Okay. What do you see? Get my ear out of the way.
An electrical tower.
An electrical tower. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Let me start a little video here. And I'm going to let it run for about 3 seconds. Come on.
Person walking.
Okay. You see that person walking? How do you know that? There are a dozen spots on that screen. And yet your brain filled in a whole lot of information. Your brain filled in some information based on some patterns, some pattern recognition on how arms and legs move, that allowed you to see that in fact that is a person walking. Somebody strapped lights to somebody's arm and legs and torso and videoed them while they were walking. Your brain is filling in a lot of details that aren't there, right? And in this case, it got it exactly right, and that's what I'm talking about. You can work with very little information and draw correct conclusions. Yeah. Okay. All right. But sometimes our brains lie to us. Tell me what you see there on the right. Well, you know, it's not really working. I mean, it's actually, what do you see? It's interesting.
They're moving.
You see them moving? How many of you see them moving? Yeah, okay, I'm maybe a little close because you're supposed to see them moving, and when I look at it from here, I don't, but I can see it on the screen. They're not. They're just sitting there absolutely still. You can kind of stop. You can kind of stop them moving if you just put something on one of these little squares. You can hold that particular circle. There's nothing moving in that image, but your brain is processing that as motion. Here's another one. This one's more dramatic, I think. Come on. Okay. Tell me about those yellow and blue rectangles. What are they doing there? They're moving. Are they even? Are they moving sort of together, or is it smooth motion? No, it's what does it look like? Choppy motion? You think, okay. So yeah, it looks like they're kind of starting and stopping, right? Together. Okay. Well, let me do this. I'm going to stop them if I can. There. Okay, they're lined up, right? Come on, stop. They're lined up again. And lined up again. They're actually moving exactly together, and if I get rid of the black thing there, the black and white stripes, they're moving exactly together. Okay, so again, your brain is processing something incorrectly, but everybody's does it. It's not like you've got any control over it. You can't will yourself not to see those things moving in a choppy fashion, even after you can see that they're moving together. You can't do anything about the fact that your brain is processing information in the context in which it's being seen. This is actually my favorite one, and then we'll move on from these optical illusions. I could play with these things all day. Squares A and B. Color-wise, same, different? What do you think?
Different.
Different? How many people think they're different? Yeah, I see one as black and one as white on a checkerboard, right? Right? All right, well, here's the same image with some gray bars put in place, and you can see that A and B are actually the same color. Your brain is incapable of seeing, I mean, even now when you see that side by side with the original image, at least I cannot will myself to see squares A and B the same, even though my brain knows that they are, because your brain perceives things in the context, you know, of the whole image. You can't do anything about it, okay? But you need to be aware of it because, in fact, you can make mistakes based on this. Now, there are some really famous mistakes based on optical illusions. There was a famous explorer, Ross, who was British, looking for a Northwest Passageway, got to the Baffin Bay and saw an optical illusion that essentially looked like a mountain range blocking the western side of the bay. So he turned around and went back to England. But that mountain range, it did exist, but because of some really funny atmospheric conditions, it was actually 200 miles away. But he thought it was 20 miles away, and he thought, okay, can't get there that way, went back. And in fact, it set back that search for the Northwest Passageway by a long time because his brain was fooled by this kind of optical illusion. So I'm going to just show a couple of others. This one you might have seen. Those guys look the same height? No, they look different, right? But how would, your part of your brain is saying those three men are very different size, right? The ones that are closest to, well, the one on the left is the smallest, the one on the right is the largest. But, if we measure them, and there I have 3 bars of the same length, and I get PowerPoint to drag them over, you can see that they're actually the same. Okay, here's another one. The diagonal lines, the ones that are going from upper left to lower right, they look parallel to you? They really don't look parallel to me because of those cross things. Again, it's the context, because as you probably gathered by now, these are all tricks, and they are in fact exactly parallel. Okay, now there are 2 things that are going on in this particular set of images. One is what Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, would refer to as fast thinking. That's the thinking that you use to perceive the world around you and to make these rapid decisions. The first thing you saw was men of different height, of lines that weren't parallel. That's your fast brain. It's like your brain has 2 components. Kahneman calls them system 1 and system 2. And it's not physiological, it's just kind of a way of thinking about it. But system 1 is the automatic subconscious thinking, the intuitive stuff that allows you to read an expression on someone's face, can tell anger from happiness, can tell boredom from excitement, whatever. It's the part that sees these optical illusions. The slow part of your brain, which is called System 2, is the one that's more rational and analytical, and that's the one that I employed when I said, well, they look different, but I'm going to measure them, okay? That's slow thinking. That's the rational, critical thinking part of it. System 1 thinking is the ability to distinguish how far away something is. It's, like I said, relative sizes, reading facial expressions, interpreting tones of voice, so you can tell if somebody's really mad or really happy, or something like that. It allows you to form opinions of people based on how they look. That's actually really important. In most presidential elections, most important elections, the candidate that's perceived as better looking, more professional, and taller wins, despite what they might have to say about despite what their political platform might be. Because our System 1, our rapid thinking, makes such a strong impression, and because we think we're always right, because most of the time we are, we don't tend to question it enough, right? So obviously you shouldn't be making a decision about a political candidate based on their height, but you do, and so you need to know that. Maybe you don't, but you probably do, because most people do. It's important that we be able to do both System 1, fast thinking, and System 2, slow thinking. I was in a really bad car accident about 5 years ago. I was in the zone somewhere thinking about something else, and I ran a red light. It was totally my fault. And I got hit. I was in my Prius, and I got hit, like right here, by like a sport utility truck driving 55 miles an hour. I was incredibly lucky to not really be hurt. Okay, it took forever for me to trust myself as a driver again, to trust myself that I would be able to see what was around me and respond to it, because that morning that I had that accident, I didn't. So you need System 1. It's probably actually pretty dangerous to be such a nervous driver that you just get stuck and won't pull out into intersections at all. You need System 1. But you also need System 2. So you need to know when you're engaging System 1 and when you're engaging System 2. Okay. All right. Now, so those are some ways that we can be wrong, because we're responding intuitively instead of critically, because we're being tricked by the way our brains see things in context. But sometimes we make mistakes because we try to fill in gaps of information. And I have a couple of examples of that, hopefully in the right order here. But here's one of them. This is an image. It's all going to be one image. I don't know. Can you see that? Okay. What do you see? Okay. So tell me what you think this is a picture of. Give me some more information. Some birds, but what about them?
They're sitting on a ledge.
Uh-huh. Outside, okay. What kind of a setting do you think? Here, maybe this one will help you with that.
It's like water.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of an environment do you think this is?
Maybe a
A pond, maybe, sure. Outside somewhere, yeah, okay. Here's another one. Oh, we got some birds flying. Okay. Someone's going to eat them. It's a little hard to see in this light. I wish you could see it. You can't really. There's a hint in there that something's not quite what you think, but you can't really tell what it is. But this is, you think it's in the woods somewhere maybe, or you don't really know, right? Okay, can you see those are some buildings in the background? So that starts to fill in some more of the story. Now where do you think that pond is? Maybe a park, sure. And it could be in a town, it could be in a city, I suppose. You can't really tell, I guess, from that, but you can start to put pieces of this together. Now, imagine that you're learning some new topic in some class, and as you've studied, these are the pieces of information that you've pulled in. Okay, this is what you've learned from maybe a first reading of a text. You've learned a few pieces of information from the first reading of a text, or maybe from listening to the professor. You've gotten some of it, but you didn't quite get the whole thing. Now, if you're asked to write an essay about this, you're going to fill in a lot of gaps, aren't you? Because there are a lot of gaps in this. And you might be right, or, you might be wrong. Now, here's something. This kind of changes the perception, I think, of this image a little bit. Right? Now this is going to change the way you think about that, having this piece of information. So as you're learning something, there are going to always be gaps, because if there aren't gaps, that means you're not actually learning it. It means you already know it, right? And so you need to fill in as many of the gaps as you can, because if you don't, you're going to make some assumptions about what's going on that may or may not be right. And in fact, prior to the picture of that guy's face showing up, you probably wouldn't have thought there were any people here, right? And certainly, even now, I don't think you would realize that what this is a man in Tokyo feeding birds out of the palm of his hand in a little city park. So my point is that we make things up to fill in the gaps. That's how we learn. We may or may not be right about those gaps, about what we put in those gaps, but we're going to tend to believe it because we've created it for ourselves. We tend to fill in these gaps based on what we already think and what we already know. And sometimes that's good and sometimes it's not. An example that I always like, this is a fun study. It came out of the Thinking Fast and Slow book. In a department store, women were asked to compare 4 different pairs of pantyhose. So they were allowed to look at them, to touch them, to try them on, and all of this. And then they were asked to rank them. And so they did. And they all had very strong opinions about which they liked best, and they would tell you, they told the store clerk why. I like the color of this a little bit better, I like the texture of these a little better, this pair fit me a little better, and so on and so forth. But every single pair of pantyhose was exactly the same. But even after learning that every pair was the same, they still held true, oh no, these are better, even though they all came out of the same box of legs or whatever it was. They made stuff up, but became so firmly entrenched in what they made up because they expected there to be a difference that they still believed it, right? It's a little bit like that optical illusion example with the checkerboard. You know they're the same color. I showed you they're the same color, but you still can't believe it. You still see it differently. And that's what can happen cognitively too, as well. Okay. Just read that. Everybody read it? Yeah? Okay. Thank you. All right. Now, part of what I said with the pantyhose example is that we tend to see what we believe is there. What do you see in this image? What do you think that is?
Coffee beans.
Coffee beans, okay. It's a pile of coffee beans. You see what you believe is there, and it matters a lot, much more than a hill of beans. Because if you're asked to think about something that's at odds with what you expect to see or know or hear, it's very difficult to see that because you're really bound by what you expect. So does anyone see anything in there that's not a coffee bean? Ah, who said that? Very good. Yeah, I'm going to get up and show you where, because it's really hard to see. But down here, right there, there's a face. Okay? Now, you didn't see that. Is that because you don't know what a face looks like? Of course not. It's because you're expecting to see coffee beans and your brain glossed right over that. That happens when you're thinking, too. If you're expecting things to be a particular way, if you're expecting that there's a set of facts that are true, if you get a piece of information that conflicts with those facts, what do? Tend not even to know about it. That's why it's so hard to change somebody's mind about something, even with evidence, even with strong evidence that something else is true. You know, if you believe that the sky is blue and that is your firm belief, and I walk outside and I take a picture and the sky is red that day, you won't believe it, right? There are lots and lots of cases of this in the sciences where people had these really strongly held opinions about how the world worked, and when new data came out that said, that can't be right, it was ignored. Things as simple as the formula for water, H2O, that determination was held up by about 50 years because they had this idea that if you only had two elements, they had to be 1-to-1. So water had to be OH instead of, well, HO instead of H2O, because they had this idea and they couldn't see that the data was telling them something else. Most of the time, people try to prove themselves right. They say, okay, I think that this is coffee beans, and see, look at all those coffee beans. Look at them all, look at them all, look at them all. And they won't even see the guy's face in there. And if they do, they'll probably ignore it if they really are convinced that that's all coffee beans. There's a certain sort of emotional connection to what you think is right, and there's a certain sort of emotional connection to certain kinds of things that make you ignore the evidence. For instance, right now, it actually kind of amuses me how concerned people are about Ebola in the United States. Now, if I were in Western Africa, I'd be a little worried about Ebola. But in the United States, you don't have to worry about Ebola. There's one case, or maybe a couple of cases now, that are reported of people that had been to West Africa that came back with it. Your chances of contracting Ebola in Saginaw, Michigan are about 0, almost identically 0. And people are really worried about that. Now, your chances of contracting other things that are just as deadly in Michigan are way higher, but we're not worried about that because that's not in our minds right now. You know, you're not particularly worried about getting the measles. Well, probably most of you have had measles shots, but you're not worried about things like that are actually much more likely and can be also devastating. So, you know, we tend to draw these, we don't always look at information rationally. We don't always see it correctly in the broader context. So that's another way that we can be wrong. Now, let's go back to that thing I had you read. What happened to Jane's wallet?
She just noticed it was missing.
You're too good. Okay, most people will tell me that wallet, that she was pickpocketed, right? Because it was in the streets of New York, she'd been out on busy streets, and her wallet was missing. Most people will add to that story that it was stolen. And I don't know if you were thinking that or not when I asked the question before she correctly said, well, she noticed it was missing. But there was actually no evidence in that sentence that it was stolen at all. She just noticed it was missing. You know, she left it somewhere, you know. But anyway, my point there, thank you. My point there is that most people will fill in extra information, also based, again, on, in this case, verbal context, the fact that it was New York City, the fact that it was crowded, and so on. Maybe I should have used a different city. Okay, now let's think about how these connections and contexts affect you as you're learning a new subject. Okay, so let's imagine that you're in, I don't know, let's make it a history class, something that I really don't know a whole lot about, I'll be honest, as a scientist. And here's something that you learn. I don't know what it is, just some piece of information. And here's something else that you learn that happened about the same time. And here's something else, and here's something else, okay? Now, because you're trying to make sense of this information, what do? Well, you try to draw connections, right? So you draw some connections. And that's good. That's how you contextualize information, and that's how you hold things together so that you can, in fact, remember them. Because if the world were just 10 bazillion disconnected facts, you'd never remember anything, right? But you make linkages, and that's a good thing. That's how people become experts. Now, here comes another piece of information. And you struggle to try to find a connection there, and you just can't find it. So what do? Well, a lot of times people will make what I'll call erroneous connections, and they'll force it into this system. If it doesn't fit, if it doesn't seem to fit, I would argue that chances are pretty good it doesn't fit. Because maybe, in fact, as you're learning something new, you're building these connections, as you should, but maybe you're missing a lot. Maybe, in fact, these are all meant to be associated with two different structures, two different organizational structures, two different, in history, maybe two completely isolated sets of things that just happen to be happening at the same time. And the ones on the left actually belong to that set of, that set of information. The ones on the right belong to a different one. And that lone guy way over there that we couldn't fit in, the reason it didn't fit in is because it was really very distantly or not at all related. So to the red ones in the middle here. So again, this is something that happens as you're learning something new that can cause you to be wrong about the way you're synthesizing knowledge. Is this a bad thing? No, not at all. The fact that you're synthesizing knowledge is a good thing. It's just that you have to remember that you may not have the whole picture, and you have to spend the time, and unfortunately it is time, to try and generate as much of the picture as you can, so that you don't just have those birds sitting on that ledge, and you don't just have the swamp, that you get the whole picture, so you see the guy holding his hand out. Or in this case, so that you see that they're two completely separate series of events that maybe weren't particularly linked at all, but there's some kind of thing here in the middle that could almost seem like they're linked, but they're not. This is where we get a lot of causality and correlational things mixed up. Things that happen because of the tree on the left may look like they're related to things on the tree on the right, but they're really not. And so that's where we get a lot of those things mixed up. But this is an important natural part of the learning process, and it's not something that means that you're not getting it. It's not a flaw. It's just a step in the process. So we make incorrect connections that may lead us astray later. Okay, so what's wrong with being wrong? Well, we make mistakes for lots of reasons, and almost none of them are because we're in any way flawed, that we're not smart. It has nothing to do with any of that. It's just the way our brains process things and the way our brains have to synthesize new information. So I want to just sort of think about this. When you said that you were, I'm not gonna pick on you. My friend here said that she was embarrassed when she found out she was wrong. Why do you suppose people feel embarrassment when they find out that they're wrong about something?
Because they're not knowledgeable on the subject.
Because they feel like they're not knowledgeable. Maybe they don't know very much. Okay, why else?
They can feel like that someone else is smarter than them when they don't want to be the one that's not as smart.
Right, because it makes them feel less smart than other people. They're not. It has nothing to do with being smart, but that's how you feel, right? Oh man, I was so stupid to think that, right? How many times have you said that to yourself? I've said it 10 times today, right? What else? Yeah.
Maybe the judgment of other people.
Okay. They're worried about the judgment of other people, sure. Maybe they feel like they're losing face. That's kind of what you're saying, among their friends and peers, for all those reasons. Another thing I think about, and it kind of depends on what you're wrong about, whether I think that this is a significant factor, but it can actually take away a piece of you. In one of these books, there was a story about a young woman brought up in a very strict religious background with very, very religiously conservative ideas. She decided to go to art school in a major city, and she did. Her parents and her family were none too happy about it, but they knew she really wanted to be an artist, and they felt that this was the way for it to happen. But in the city, there are a lot of other influences besides this relatively small town family network. And when she got to the city, she started dating a man who was an atheist. And the family was certainly not too happy about that, but as this woman got to know this man over time, she began to understand and even kind of appreciate his viewpoint. And so she began to question her own background in a major way, so much so that later, when that relationship dissolved and she went back to her small town, that was not part of her anymore. And so she gave up something that was very important to her. And, I'm not making any statement about correct religious beliefs here. I'm just saying that when you decide that something that you previously believed was wrong, if it was an important value to you, you've given up sort of an integral part of who you are. And that's not easy to do, no matter what it's about. So that's another reason that people don't like being wrong. It does sort of change who you are. It's transformative. Now that can be very good, or it can be negative. It can be both. And again, it's just a transformative process. I want to go back to learning, and something that is near and dear. This is the one little piece of science here that I'm going to tell you about. I guess it's the second. I have this thing about mathematics. I love mathematics. That's not a majority opinion in today's world. And I have an idea of when people's aversion to mathematics start. I have no idea if this is true. This is just my own hypothesis. And it goes back to, I don't know, 3rd grade. Okay? 3rd grade seems to be the breaking point for me. So here are 2 math problems. Which one would you rather do? A or B? How many, raise of hands, how many would rather do A? Oh, how many would rather do B? Oh, we got one guy, 2 people that are long division, maybe 2 or 3 people that are fans of long division. What is it about long division? That's the first time I hear kids complaining about math. Any ideas? Yeah.
It's a lot more thought process.
It's more thought process, yeah, it's more abstract. Yes? Decimals, yeah, you're not quite sure where the decimal point's going to go. Yeah, you get uneven results. Yeah.
You have to guess for long division.
Perfect. Exactly. People don't like being wrong. And the first step in doing a long division problem is taking a guess and then seeing if it's right. And if it's not right, well, the answer is you do it again. But what a lot of people do is think, oh, I can't do this. And they get frustrated, and even as little kids give up, because even as little kids they like to be right, and the first step in long division requires a guess and the possibility of making a mistake. But whoever said the thing about decimals is also right. In multiplication, it's much easier to line things up so you end up with the right place values. In long division, people move those all over the place. So those are both factors, but it's that uncertainty and that fear of making a mistake early on, I think, that makes that long division scary to people. I can tell you something. I've gotten more math problems wrong than most of you will ever do in your life, except maybe the engineers, because I've done a lot of math problems in my life. That's okay. It's by doing it wrong that I learn how to do it right. I think you said that at the beginning. Or was it you? One of you said that in the beginning. It's by doing things wrong that you learn how to do it right. When I was teaching chemistry, I had a student who did a chemistry problem, who asked me to do a chemistry problem on the board, and so I did it. And she said, well, Dr. Huntley, I got exactly the same answer, but I didn't include that one step in the middle. And I said, well, yeah, you got the right answer because it was multiplying by a ratio, and it turned out that the ratio was 1, so it didn't matter if you did it or not. And I said, but your method won't generally work. And she said, but I got it right, so it must be an okay way to do it. And I said, well, it's not an okay way to do it. You were lucky that it came out the same. And we had this discussion, and I was trying to be helpful and say it won't generally work. But she got really frustrated and actually was almost in tears by the end of it. And it was like, but if I get the right answer, why do you care how I do it? And it's like, I care because I want it to be right every time, not just sometimes when it's going to be coincidental. And that was really hard. So sometimes, I'm just throwing this out there, if you feel like the teacher says you have to do it my way, it might be something like that where they're trying to protect you from making mistakes later on. All right, well, I'm going to summarize now because I've probably talked too long as it is. But just a few comments. If you're making mistakes, it's because you're learning. If you're not making many mistakes, it's because you already knew whatever it is you're working on. Don't be discouraged by mistakes. They're actually really helpful. Maybe you just need more context, like the picture of the birds, or look at it from a different angle. Maybe it's the foundational principles, those 2 trees, that you need to help connect the pieces. You may need to think about what your biases and misperceptions are, things that you might have learned somewhere else that are coloring your ability to see a path through the challenge. And then you need to think about how you're responding to those and go back a step and think slowly and critically about how to overcome those biases. But here's my one piece of advice. Be wrong before you're in the testing room, because then it's too late. It takes a lot of time, but that's why you need to I always say be wrong in private, not because there's anything shameful about it, but because you want to work through all of those mistakes before they actually count. And finding them on your own or with a tutor or even in a teacher's office hours, that's a great thing, because that's when you can make the corrections. It does take a lot of time to make and correct mistakes, but it's really the only way you learn anything new. So that's sort of what I had to say to you this morning, and I'd be happy to engage any further discussion. Thank you.